Hi, and welcome to another episode of Abuse Recovery Success, helping you to find light on the other side of darkness. Today, I have a fantastic guest with us, Kezia, a writer and author who I couldn't be more excited to share her story of strength and hope with you, as she is also a fellow of us in recovery. So, Kezia, welcome to Abuse Recovery Success. I'm thankful to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really looking forward to sharing my story with your listeners and just having a good conversation.
Me too. I think that they're going to be inspired by you because I've been following you and that's what you've given me. So tell us about you.
Yes. Okay. So I won't start all the way back in childhood. I think I'll really start where my journey with substance abuse and addiction really took off. So I was I guess what you would call a late bloomer. So I didn't start really dabbling in drinking till I was sort of college age, I guess. So I grew up in a small town in Canada called Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and I now live in the United States. But my whole thing was that I always wanted to leave the city I lived in. I didn't want to be there. I thought I was destined for greater things. I didn't feel close to my family, and so I moved out when I was 17, and I moved overseas when I was 19. I met a guy through my work, and he was a British guy. And he pretty much said, do you want to come back to the UK? My contract is up. And I was like, sure. Because all I wanted to do was leave. And so I went over there and ended up staying for close to 7 years. So a big part of my 20s, I was there. And just normal drinking at that time, normal sort of partying, what I would just classify as typical 20-something behavior. When him and I started having issues, I contemplated coming back to Canada. My grandfather was sick at the time. My parents had kind of been talking to me about, and I'd been making regular visits back, but they had been talking to me about coming back to the area and, spending time with family. And it coincided with him and I drifting apart. If I look back on it now, I realize that we were always just better as friends. We kind of jumped into something, I think, because I wanted to escape. So I moved back to Canada under the premise that I was just going for a visit, and then called him pretty much and said, sell the house, I'm moving back. And it was amicable. I guess from my part, those feelings weren't really there. But he was a great guy. And so I moved back and got a job and ended up staying back in my hometown for a couple of years. The drinking escalated a little bit during that time. I think I felt lost because of my breakup with him. He was such a great guy. My family loved him. And I think the expectation was that we were going to stay the course and get married. He was a little bit older than me. And but when that fell apart, I always grew up with the idea that I had to, act a certain way. I had to be a certain level of successful. I had to almost perfectionist tendencies. I'm a Virgo, and I think it's natural for me to have that. But it really manifested. My father's he's very detail oriented, so that played a big part in how I felt. Anyway, so I started going out with my new circle of friends when I moved back, and it was people around then Facebook had just come out. So I reconnected with people from high school and from junior high. And I had been very geeky and kind of quiet and shy during my school years. And then I guess it's like that ugly duckling story where I blossomed later and they were like, hey, want to hang out? um, so I came into this circle of friends and we started going out. And I started having some incidents where I wouldn't remember things that happened when we went out. Maybe not necessarily, knowing what I know now about blackouts, there might have been an element to that or brownouts or something along those lines. Anyway, but I carried on and there was no big repercussions for any of that. stayed there for a couple years and then ended up quitting that job and going on a little bit of a traveling thing. Went over to Australia and did some sightseeing there. And when I came back, one of my best friends from school invited me to spend the summer with her and her boyfriend out in a place called Kelowna, which is one of the big party towns in Canada. So it's on the Vancouver side. And I landed there again with the same feelings that I was a little bit lost. I felt like I hadn't quite hit the mark. Things had ended badly with the job. There was some issues with my boss and sexual harassment stuff with other people um, and narcissistic type stuff and gaslighting and stuff like that. So I came back and I went to live with her, and things were okay, but my partying again really took off. And I fell into what I would call my first addiction, which was cocaine. And that was a huge part of my time there. It was there was other club drugs too. I did a little bit of club promoting while I was there. So I was always in that party scene. I made it my goal to be seen with the right people. We got a lot of big name DJs into town. It was like, I'm partying with David Guetta, or I'm, hanging out with Steve Aoki. Like all that kind of stuff really started to matter to me at that point, because that's what my self-worth was based on. And around that time, about a year after I'd moved there, or maybe less than that, I met the guy that would later become my daughter's father. He was, or he is, 9 years younger than me. And that kind of indicates the type of people I was hanging out with. I wanted to party. I was like 28 or 29 when I first tried drugs, and he was 20. So, and we got involved, and things went really bad there. Some stuff went wrong with, he was involved in the drug running and stuff like that. And we ended up having to leave. And we did a midnight move. We left in the middle of the night, literally. We were living with these guys that ran a tattoo studio there. We packed up our stuff knowing we were leaving, but then waited till they went to work the next day, got in the car, drove 5 hours to where my parents were living, and just kind of showed up on their doorstep with our two cats. And we're like, we're here. And I didn't tell them what was going on, but I think my parents kind of knew. I was very skinny. I wasn't eating. I just looked like death. I look at those pictures now and I can see the little girl was just hurting, that was me. But yeah. And so him and I ended up, long story short, we ended up staying for a while. His mom was actually living on the other side of the country, and she invited us to come out. Again, make another move, get on a plane, take our cats, and we land just outside of Toronto. And things were okay, but he was starting to show some of his controlling tendencies. And I later realized that was more like narcissism, not just controlling. He was never physically abusive, but very mentally abusive. I wasn't allowed to have friends. He would check my phone, hack into my emails, my social media. I couldn't talk to anybody. And every time I did make a friend, he would belittle me or try to, tell me what I could wear if I was going out. I never was allowed to go out on my own. And, distance started to grow between us because I wanted to taper down our partying lifestyle, and he wanted to keep going. So I thought, okay, we're moving. Great. We can get rid of the drugs and leave that all behind. Well, as a lot of people know, when you move somewhere, you can find drugs. You can find anything that you want if you go looking for it. And we did. And that again became the lifestyle that we picked up. What I noticed during all of this was that I wasn't able to hold down a job. I had these dreams of things that I wanted to do ever since I was a young girl. I wanted to be a writer, and I was a daydreamer, and I saw stories and everything. But because of the active addiction, I just wasn't able to tap into that. I had no follow through. I was flaky. I was just really not showing up the way I wanted to. So him and I, things came to a head when I got pregnant, and he wanted me to terminate the pregnancy. It wasn't planned. And I was like, no, I'm 32. I'm not doing it. And I didn't. But that was basically me going through pregnancy alone, going to ultrasounds by myself, getting in fights with him on the way there, him like leaving me on the side of the highway, like just horrible stuff. But I went through with it. And of course, I stopped doing drugs, I stopped drinking, all that stuff. And he continued with that. And he would try to hide it, but he just, when somebody's doing it, especially if you used to do it yourself. So we ended up, I ended up leaving him when my daughter was 10 months old. And her and I were essentially homeless. We ended up living at numerous different friends' places. I found a local moms group on Facebook, and her and I kind of, I guess you could say, couch surfed. We ended up in different places. And the culmination of that was that we ended up homeless. I burned bridges everywhere that I lived because I carried on my behavior because I was self-medicating and just basically trying to survive all the trauma. But I didn't recognize it as trauma. I just was on this constant, hamster wheel of trying to survive. So I was working in restaurants. I went back to serving, just really, again, not doing what I wanted to, but I wasn't mentally in any state to, have any sort of responsibility. So we ended up homeless. We lived in a hotel through the Salvation Army for 2 months. And during that time, my family still lived all out west. So I have a younger brother and then my parents. And, I just felt like that situation really showed me the distance that I felt between my family because in other families, I would see like if anything like that happened to my daughter and she was my age, I would pay anything. I would put her up in her, I'd bring her into I would never let that happen. And I think that really hurt me. And so her and I eventually, my parents co-signed on a place for us just outside of Toronto. And we stayed there for the last 4.5 years. And my drinking and my partying at that point was just me, but the whole mommy wine culture thing picked up. But I was doing drugs after she was born. My weekends without her, I was doing it. And again, making friends with the wrong types of people that would use me, manipulate me. They benefited from me getting blackout when we'd go out to the bar and like, oh, Kezia is such a riot. Like she'll go make out with anyone, guy, girl, whatever kind of thing. And that was sort of how I became known. But I wasn't happy about that. But like I would keep drinking because I didn't know how to deal with it. That was the only way that I knew how to show up. So yeah, so stuff continued. And in the fall of 2019, I was still trying to carry on that things were like normal. So I'd met my fiance, who's now my husband, through Instagram in 2018, which was a way that I was meeting a lot of people, men that I was talking to, stuff like that. It turned out for the best because we're married, but we met and I was still drinking. And I think then my drinking turned into trying to cope with the enormous pressure that I felt because I never thought I was going to get married. I didn't think I was deserving or worthy of, having a family and that kind of stuff. And when he came along, my parents were like, make sure that he doesn't see how dirty your house is or he's going to leave you, make sure that you clean stuff up before he gets there and that you're on your best behavior kind of thing. And I was just struggling to even stay above water. So, yeah. Fall 2019, I started listening to podcasts at the gym. I started listening to recovery type podcasts. I don't know what led me there. I just knew something in my heart. I was like, there's got to be another way. And I found a really good podcast called Home with Laura McCowan. And the following, like in 2020, she came out with her book, We Are the Luckiest. And that book, suddenly there was a voice to the things that I was feeling. But it took me another 10 months to get sober after that. And I tried and I tried. And I guess I would say that I can't do it without a community. I can't do it without knowing that there's other people supporting me. And that's that's been the key, because there was so many day ones in there. There was so much, like, giving up the drugs was way easier than giving up the alcohol because it's so socially acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I've been sober since Halloween. So we're coming up on 6 months. And I had little bits here and there before that, but I couldn't do it. Yeah, like I said, without the community, I was ending up in the ER. Like, I basically, you try to find every other thing to blame it on, because it's not the alcohol. Like, it's like, oh, I have really bad panic attacks, like, for no reason. It's like I would call an ambulance and think I was having a heart attack, and it's like, no, your body's like in withdrawal.
Yeah.
So I think now, looking back, I can laugh at it, but it was scary at the time.
Mm.
Like, it was really, it's such a, I was drinking on my own at the end. Like, it's a very lonely and isolating addiction. And I think it's your coping mechanism until it's not. So you just really, like, are in survival mode.
Yeah, survival mode is right.
Yeah. So now I'm here, and I know that a lot of people want to hear those stories of hope, because I think that's what brought me here, is
Sure.
like listening to that podcast secretly, but like kind of absorbing it and knowing that I wasn't alone.
I think, you hit the nail on the head with a lot of what you said, but really for me, like trying to go to the emergency room, thinking it's all the other things. I mean, I don't know. For me, I had many attempts at sobriety. So this final one, I knew that it was the alcoholism, but there were definitely so many times before that you try to blame it away. But I related to a lot of what you said. And I think what I love about this podcast is having guests of all different lengths of sobriety on, because we never know what a listener might be going through, what part of the journey they're on. And so before, I want to ask you some questions about your background specifically, and then kind of our typical podcast questions. But what I really like to know first and foremost is, how do you feel today at 6 months sober? Just give us a little like insert into today.
I think today I recognize that happiness is my birthright. So, like, it's for me, it's for you, it's for everybody. We're all deserving of feeling happy, and that I don't have to struggle in the ways that I was, so just to survive. Now I feel a sense of calm most of the time. I do still deal with my anxiety, but it's a normal anxiety, like when I get excited about things or nervous about things that mean a lot to me. And yeah, I think I'm just, I see myself as that, like I said, that little girl inside that she just wanted to be loved and to be accepted for how she was. And I think now, being really kind and able to show up. And some days all I can do is stay sober. And it's like, okay, that's okay. Because I set the bar really high for myself. And I do have my non-negotiables, but I've learned to, like, accept that, like,
Yeah.
okay, there's certain things, like, let's tailor this list down a little bit,
Yeah. Sometimes I need to get better doing that. I feel like I was a lot like that in the beginning of getting sober. For me, it was so incredibly hard this last time. And, I was hanging on by a strand. And so it was the total focus. But now, yeah, we all fall victim to, piling on too much. So even you saying that is like, yeah, I need to remember that too, like be proud of myself. But I like how you said, like, loving yourself, like all of that self-love, because I feel like part of the reasons it's so hard to get sober at first is because we're at a point where we've depleted all that self-love, where we no longer love or respect ourselves, or at least that's how I felt. Is that how you would say you felt?
Yeah, and I think the other part of that's absolutely true. The other part was I was giving that love to everybody except for myself. So, like, I was like, um, allowing myself to be depleted by, strangers or by people in my life who were using me, and I was always coming last. And as mothers, we also do that. But I think me being able to have boundaries now with people in my life and with expectations makes me a better mother, makes me a better wife, makes me a better person and a happier person, because I'm able to respect myself. So I do agree with that.
Tell me a little bit, you mentioned earlier that the hardest thing for you to quit was alcohol. And um, yeah, I think for some listeners that might be listening and trying to quit right now, it is that socially acceptable thing. I joke about this and I've said it before. I have a girlfriend that was in recovery and she, was her DOC drug of choice is cocaine, full
Mhm.
blown. And,
Mhm.
liked alcohol, but just really never whatever. And she kind of joked with me one day and she said, I don't know how you alcoholics do it because if someone was walking around a restaurant with platters of Coke, I don't know if I could,
Yeah.
she was joking with me, but it is very true. It is socially acceptable. And you mentioned earlier the mommy wine culture. Tell me more about right now, only 6 months in, how are you guarding against that? Did you remove a bunch of people? Like tell the listeners what you did to extricate yourself from that.
Yeah, I think you said removing people. I think that actually started to happen before I got sober. I realized in myself, I felt really uncomfortable in my skin waking up after those nights, I would say, when I would black out at the bar they used to call me the hurricane because I would just go and do whatever, or the tornado or something. After those nights, um, I started saying no to people. Like I didn't want to go out every time my daughter was away for the weekend. And I just kind of became a hermit. Um, and then, and so now, like fast forward to today, I have lost a lot of those friends, but I use the air quotes because a lot of them weren't my friends. And I think that's really important. These people didn't care about me. They cared about having a good time and keeping the party going. I think it's been a blessing too that I've gotten sober in a pandemic because I haven't had the temptations that I would have had. My other thing is I moved to this country in December, and
Yeah.
so I don't have the strong ties
Yeah,
here.
ties.
And the other thing is my husband doesn't drink, so he's not sober, but he doesn't drink. So I think that all of those things together
That's
are what
huge.
makes it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
tell me about this. So you moved in December. Well, I was going to start asking about the husband either way, but you met him online. He was there for some of the drinking. Where are you guys at now? What brought you to the US? Tell us about that.
So he's actually American.
Okay.
So he's born and raised here, and when we met, I was still drinking. And like I said, it kind of ramped up because I felt all this pressure to like not lose him. And he would come up and visit. He would drive up. It's like 7 hours, usually every maybe once a month. So I would know he was coming up for the weekend. And he says now that there was times he would come up and he would smell alcohol on my breath because I used it to calm my nerves a lot. I'm actually introverted, but I thought I was
Yeah.
extroverted during all the drinking. It's like, surprise, I'm ambivert, but it's like,
Yeah.
I would do that because I get so nervous when he was coming. So it like just mellowed me out, stopped my brain going. And yeah, so we dated long distance for 2 years because of the immigration process. So we were like almost about to have our interview and then COVID hit. And so plus I have my daughter and I had to go through all of that legal stuff to get her here as well. And him and I just got married in February. So he
Yeah.
knows everything about this. But it was funny because I tried the way he came across it was an old Instagram and it was like some inspirational bullshit post about like recovery of some sort, right? And he reached out about that. And meanwhile, I'm still drinking every night. So, you kind of
That's
like
funny.
put that idea out
Yeah.
there. But yeah.
So, yeah, so 6 months, and I know you said Halloween. Was it a specific turning point that you had? I know you started to kind of listen to the recovery podcast, but was there like one pointed, horrible night out or something, or one epiphany thought, or what was it?
It was a few things. I had read that book, the We Are the Luckiest book, and Laura actually founded something called the Luckiest Club, which is a sobriety support community. And you can sign up and pay a monthly fee, and you go to meetings, Zoom meetings. And I started doing those. And I always had my camera off, and I was probably still drinking, whatever, but listening. And then I started turning on my camera one day and I started reaching out because the health implications of what I was doing, I wasn't fully honest with my doctor. And so she would prescribe like benzos, and then I'd be mixing those with the alcohol, like so dangerous, right? And it was like this like hamster wheel that I couldn't get off of. And I was just desperate to get off. So I had to be fully honest with her and be like, I need to get off this, and what can you prescribe? And she did. And making the connections in that community where, like, if you go missing for a day or whatever, somebody's, texting you or calling you. And there was no big night out. There was nothing like that. Halloween was traditionally a big night out, and I thought this will be my last hurrah
Yeah.
Halloween.
Makes sense. So what would you wish to tell someone who's trapped in shame or suffering right now? There's a listener that's hearing your story and thinking, maybe I can do this. What would you tell them?
I think really you don't know how good it can be until you can put down those things. And regardless of whether you do it the first time or the 100th time, once you know, there's a saying like, once you know those things, you can't unknow them.
Yeah.
And I think once I started exploring that, I knew that there was a reason behind that. And to see where my life is now, I'm not a big fan of like the before and after pictures, but I know the girl like in those pictures and the hollow eyes and things like that. And to know that that's who I was to where I am now, there's that possibility for anybody, but you have to really admit that you need help. Is like asking for help was such a key thing. And that takes vulnerability, and that takes letting go of the shame, because there's so much shame and stigma around addictions and so much that people don't understand about it.
Yeah, the shame and the despair that I felt when I was first getting sober. It's hard to really put into words that feeling of hopelessness, and it was terrifying, but I feel like it was just putting one foot in front of the other. And for me, AA was a huge part of getting recovery. I'm not currently going to AA, but I do believe that that's what helped me kind of get to where I'm at today. What would you say, speaking of today, what makes you you? Like, who are you, Kezia, today? Like, how would you define yourself? And then give the listeners a couple of daily practices that you use to stay centered and helps you to be this woman that you are today.
Yeah, that's a good question. Today, I consider myself a strong survivor. I'm a brave woman, and I'm a mother, a wife, a teacher, and an artist. So that's been a big discovery for me, is really tapping into the creative side of my identity. I think that's something that's not as measurable as like the things that my father, for example, liked to measure with grades or whatever it was. And it was always a belief in our family, like, you can't be a writer, like, you got to have another like backup plan or whatever. And I was like, okay. So my husband was the first one that told me, like, you can be a writer. You are a writer. You can do this. And I was like, okay. So now that's how I identify, is like I've reclaimed the things that I didn't think were for me. For daily practices, like my non-negotiables that I mentioned. So I get up at the same time every day, even on the weekend. And I get up at 5:30. I do 10 minutes on my Calm app on my phone. Like, that's what I can manage. And it's before anybody else in the house is up. You're a mom, you want that quiet time. So I do that. I have to exercise of some sort every day. Fresh air is big, but I also have to do my like sweaty workout. I find I need to move energy through me that way. Writing, and I guess connecting. I do still usually do one meeting a day of some sort. There's been some really good subgroups. I've just started exploring the trauma piece in my background, and that's like huge. But I'm hopeful. I think it's just going to be a work of a lifetime. I think your sobriety changes throughout your lifetime, but I think it's something that I can't ever forget, like how bad it was. So that's my non-negotiable.
I really agree. And I love how you said keep it moving and keep that sweat and everything, because I think we all need a way to still release. Because for me, part of the habit or the practice of my alcoholism was trying to find a release. Yeah. And so I think there's healthy ways, we can find that out there. And I think that, it may sound silly to a listener right now, mired in addiction and trapped, feeling like there's no way out, and she's telling me I'm going to work out, everything's going to be fine. No, it's not. I mean, no one's saying that. But what I think both you and I are trying to explain is that on the other side of that darkness, on the other side, you'll find ways to kind of work through some of those bits of anxiety and tension. And it's all a lot of things. Like the fact that you're going to meetings. I mean, I was sometimes 2 meetings a day for the first year, for sure. And I think this podcast is a huge outlet for me in being able to stay sober. So how do you want the listeners to find you? If they're interested in following you and gathering strength and hope from you, how can they find you?
Yeah. So I started a sober Instagram account back in the summer last year, and I do that. It's the _sober_elephant_chronicles. That's mainly where I am, but I also have a blog, which is keziacalvert.substack.com. And that's where I do a lot of my writing, but my sober Instagram has been where I've really, it's been an outlet for me. Like you have your podcast. I think that's just been like such a good place for me to draw inspiration. And one of my big things, I know in AA, you guys have talked about it, is like acts of service. I just like helping other people. If my story if one, mom, for example, hears my story, my share, that can give, her the hope and her the wings that she needs to fly out of like her addiction. And I think that's really what I'm there for. So those are my 2 main places to be found right now.
Right. Well, I love it. I'm definitely telling you, listeners, you need to follow this girl. She may have 6 months, but she's got a lot of wisdom and knowledge to share with us. And you know what? Each day, I may have almost 3 years, but I only really have 1 day. And we're in charge of that 1 day. And I'm just 1 drink away from starting all over again. So being responsible and taking care of our recovery is what comes first for me. And it sounds like it does for you too, Kezia.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, thank you, Kezia, for being with us. If you want to get back in touch with us at Abuse Recovery Success, you can find me, April_the Hills, on Instagram and TikTok. You can find my YouTube podcast available under April Hill. Our website is abuserecoverysuccess.com. You can listen to us on all platforms. It's been a pleasure, Kezia. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care, my dear.